This is Future Fork, a show that explores the world of food and the decisions we can make today that will shape our future. On the show, you'll hear from innovators in the food space. We'll have disruptive conversations with people from around the globe who are taking the lead on topics like food sustainability, ending world hunger, food security, and so much more. I'm your host, Paul Newnham. In this episode, we're joined by Alesha Miller. Alesha is the Chief Strategy Officer at Digital Green, an organisation working at the forefront of digital innovation in agriculture. With a career spanning global development, technology and food systems, including leadership roles at the Gates Foundation, Alesha has been deeply focused on how we can better support smallholder farmers and build more equitable, resilient food systems. In today's conversation, we'll explore how digital tools are reshaping agriculture from the ground up, why it's important to support women farmers, and where the boldest opportunities lie to accelerate progress towards ending hunger. Let's get into it. Alesha, welcome to the show.
Thanks. Appreciate you having me.
So we're going to dive straight in. You've done a lot throughout your career. You've worked at the Chicago Council, to the Gates Foundation, and now to Digital Green. For anyone who doesn't know, what is Digital Green?
Great question. Digital Green is, I would call us a tech nonprofit or a tech NGO. And our mission is to co-create a world where farmers build prosperous and resilient communities. So we see ourselves as really bridging the gap between the farmer voice and farmers being active agents in designing the technology they want and need, and being a force for kind of achieving the kinds of outcomes we want from the food system. We grew out of Microsoft Research about 20 years ago. We were a research question at Microsoft Research India, which was, what can technology do for small-scale farmers? And out of that work, the organization was born. And now here we are 20 years later, really trying to still stay on the cutting edge and harvest the best possible outcomes from technology for farmers.
And so you've really focused on farmers, smallholder farmers in many ways, and you've spent a lot of your career around this topic. Was there a moment in your career where you saw how much potential was still untapped in smallholder farming communities?
It's interesting to think about when did I realize that? And I think I was really fortunate to realize it early, but also I was really ignorant at the beginning. And there was a quick learning. So I come from Iowa, and I come from a family where we had farmers on both sides, probably going back quite a long ways. And I grew up in a rural community where I had no interest in staying in the rural community. I remember wanting to move. And we had a farm. It would have been called like a hobby farm. It wouldn't have been the main source of our income. My dad's a pharmacist, but my relatives were farmers by like need. And so I remember that feeling of not wanting to be connected to agriculture, seeing it as not a great opportunity and not terribly interesting and hard work. And we moved away when I was in my teens. I went to grad school, studied international relations, and I thought I would work on humanitarian issues. I had other ideas. And by great fortune, ended up working in food and agriculture. And I remember when I got this job to work on smallholder agriculture thinking, oh, I'll learn what I can from this person that I'm going to work with who I really admired. But agriculture, that's kind of dull. I'll like do that for a little bit and move on. And then within a couple of weeks of really starting to like steep myself in the sort of history and practice of agriculture, I realized like my entire family history and my ability to have the opportunity to even choose what I do comes from the success of farmers before me. So I had like a realization early on that like there's too much at stake for so many people. And then I remember one of my very first visits, probably in 2007 or 8, meeting smallholder farmers in Uganda, and having numerous mothers tell me that their greatest hope would be that their children would never have to farm, and that they hoped that their kids would get off the farm. And the kids said, I want to get off the farm. And I went back to that feeling I had when I was a kid of thinking there's nothing here. It's a dead end to be on a farm in a rural area. And I think that realization combined with like what I also know about the gap between where we are and where we could be is where I realized there's just a ton of amazing and creative work to be done here. And that people want to stay on the farm if there's money to be made and if there's prosperity for their family, and that's totally possible. So I guess my realization is I started out from a position of ignorance, and then I've kind of come through that to see the incredible ingenuity of all these farmers. They're just amazing. So it's a roundabout answer, but yeah, the realization was quick, but unfortunate that it took a moment like that to realize it.
So, if I'm correct, Digital Greens models are built around local videos rather than just technology in and of itself. And why is this important? Why is it this distinction of really looking at local videos different to other ways of looking at this?
Yeah, so this is Digital Green's kind of starting work, which was when they asked that question, what can digital technology do for farmers? They tried a bunch of different things. One of them was what now seems like a really basic innovation, which was what would happen if you just recorded farmers explaining best practices in their communities, in their own language, telling narrative or story around it, and then facilitating that within a community group where someone from that community explains the practice. And it turns out that that's how we all like to learn. We like learning about people who look like us and have a shared experience. And that's what that model, it's one of the things that this digital green model, which has now been replicated by a lot of people. We were part of, I think, a group of people thinking about participatory video. It shows that we're more likely to adopt practices or try things when people look like us, when we think that there's a chance that the outcome that they're having might be the one we would have. Videos that are representative are powerful for a lot of reasons. They're also really important as role modeling videos, right? Just seeing someone who looks like you, whether that's a woman actually showing leadership and being recorded as a sort of a practice leader in her community, or someone who's taking a risk and doing something different than maybe a traditional practice. Yeah, there's something really powerful. So we've seen in Digital Green's work that plays a powerful role in adoption. And I think one of the narratives or the stories that my boss often tells is that pretty much consistently over video screenings, no matter where you do it, no matter what country, you show a video and the first questions farmers will ask are, who's that person? Where are they from? What's their name? Like you want to connect to the human on the other end of it. So that's why it matters, is because farmers learn from farmers, and video can extend that. And that was the early lesson of community video.
In so many countries, women make up the majority of the agricultural workforce, and yet often they're the last to benefit from new tools and technology. What does it take to design digital agricultural systems that work for women farmers?
Yeah. So I think inviting them to the table and asking them kind of how they want to be included is a big part of the starting place. That there's sort of a whole range of ways that women are sort of structurally left out. So in the space we're working in, which is extension, some of the reasons women don't get left out are pretty simple, right? So if an extension agent has to travel around a lot, as they do, and visit lots of households and maybe ride a motorbike by themselves, there are a lot of women who might shy away from that as a career. There's a safety implication to riding around on a motorbike. And so you might find that extension agents, this is true, of course, that there are more men than women, which already starts to create kind of a social barrier, right, between a male extension and potentially a female farmer. Maybe it's a culture where it would be inappropriate or unsafe or perceived as unsafe for an extension officer to visit a farm when the woman is home only, for example. So there's some really basic things that come with the territory when you think about someone physically visiting farm to farm. So I think one of the exciting things about digital technology is it starts to create a chance for some of the traditional kind of in-person barriers related to those things I mentioned. But even, I think we've observed that women will sometimes shy away from asking questions in mixed sex farming groups. It's a little intimidating maybe, or it's maybe culturally uncomfortable to ask a question. And so digital technologies start to kind of create a little bit more safety for women to ask the question directly, to skip over the barrier of the physical interaction maybe being a bit more challenging or unavailable. But I think the first step is we're pretty excited about the potential for digital and mobile solutions. That said, we all know women have less access to smartphones, right? And so there's a barrier there that I think is catching up. 5 or 10 years, are women going to not have mobile phones? Probably not. I think we're all going to have them. And so thinking about how do you encourage kind of social behavior, which already happens, so that people who don't have access to a phone can get access. So I think in the extension space, first thing is digital is a great opportunity. Second thing is, how do you design the experience of an app. We now have an app that's called Farmer Chat that's delivering advisory direct to farmers. How do you design that app to signal immediately to the woman that it's for her? That this is not an app that's for a man, that's for a very professional large farmer, but for her. And I think part of that is it goes down even to like the art that's being designed. We're going to be sending some of our team out to put new art, new kind of illustrative art in front of farmers to get their feedback on what feels most inviting and easy to understand. So there's graphic design elements. It's things like using voice, making voice first a capability that's possible in sort of digital tools so I can ask without having to type. So there's a whole set of form factors. And then once you get past the sort of like delivery tool, then it's the content. Does the content actually answer questions that maybe I'm interested in, which might be different than a man? Does it understand my vernacular language, which might be distinct? So I think there's a bunch of ways in which we're starting to think about design in the digital space to signal to women that it's for them, this kind of new technology.
You've written about the need for treating agricultural data infrastructure as a public good. What does that actually look like in practice?
Great question. Okay, so let me just take a second and talk briefly about Farmer Chat because it links to this question, and then I'll go to the bigger point. So this Farmer Chat app that we're using, which is AI powered, farmers can ask any question in local language, right? So we're at the point now where we have about 10 million questions that have been asked and answered on the tool. This is just the beginning, and this is just Farmer Chat. So there are other tools that people are using to ask questions. Imagine when we get to billions of questions, tens of billions of questions, which are essentially telling us directly what is on farmers' minds. How should that data be stewarded to improve the food system? I think that's a question, right? We've started doing things like publishing representative data sets onto public kind of websites. Hugging Face is a website that's kind of an AI, what do I say? It's kind of like an AI portal to share data. And you can't share all data because it contains private information. You can't share things that would, give away private information for farmers, locations or decisions. But representative data should be used to help researchers know what they should focus on. What are the things that are not being solved? It should give companies a sense of what products aren't available to farmers that they'd like to buy. That's an example where data can actually be used to make the food system more responsive, not just to farmers' needs, but you can imagine how we could make the food system more responsive to consumers as well with different kinds of data. So I think thinking about data as an input to creating a more demand-driven, more resilient food system is how I think about this. And AI is creating a new way for that to happen because it's more conversational. 10 years ago, 5 years ago, if we wanted to know an answer from a farmer about anything, you had to send someone out with a clipboard. And now you can start to gather data very conversationally and kind of continuously. And how we steward that is going to be a really critical part of the next 10 years.
I mean, let's go into that a little bit. So, food systems are continuing to change rapidly. And some of these, there's also precision farming tools that are powered by AI that are being adopted by farmers. There is this question of who owns the data. And, there's a lot of large companies now keeping some of that data. Do you think big tech is quietly becoming the most powerful force in global food systems?
So I think that this is not a new debate. I won't name which companies, but I think we know there are certain companies that have more data than most about agriculture and food. And I think farmers have a lot to say about that. And a lot of times farmers vote with their feet on this one. Um, I think there's some really interesting examples of farmers affecting policy even around ownership of data. I'll be curious to see how that continues to play out. That said, I think we've seen in general with people that even though we really want control over our personal data, we seem to want to use internet services more than we want to protect our data. And so, given the choice between having access to a tool and giving up some of that sort of agency over data, people seem to choose to give it up. But I think this point on big tech owning the data on food, I don't think yet this is the big domain that big tech is going after, which is not to say they aren't noticing that it could be a useful application. But there was an Anthropic report like maybe a month ago, where they looked at where are the biggest opportunities for AI to serve particular sectors. And listeners can go look this up. It kind of looks like a spider web, and you have a wheel with all these different sectors. And one of the sectors where they predict the least amount of utility for AI was agriculture, which I thought was really interesting. They predicted the least utility or disruption from AI for agriculture. And if you look at the other sectors, it's medicine and legal and accounting and kind of these big, frankly, pretty financially viable sectors. Agriculture, I think there's a lot to be gained from AI, but I think when you look at the profitability of businesses that serve the food system, it's not the most profitable sector. And so I think your question's a good one. Who owns the data? I don't know if these big tech companies actually are going to see agriculture as the most promising space. And in fact, I think a lot of them, if anything, there are a lot of big promises about AI and about the social goods that can come from AI. And if anything, I think a lot of these big tech companies are really hopeful that food security and agriculture might be one of the ways that there could be a big win. So there's more collaboration than you might expect on this sort of issue of agriculture and food. And I think there's also interest in thinking about how to protect sort of the public good nature of food. So quietly amassing data, absolutely. About farming, I don't know if it's that big of a deal yet. Will it be in the next couple of years, especially as people come online in low middle income countries and they start using yeah, absolutely. It'll become a huge opportunity. So I hope that those of us who are in the sort of food systems conversation can get ahead of thinking about that. And it's not just the individual. Does the individual own their data? What do you do with these places where data is going to be aggregating naturally? And how do you use that to benefit all of us more?
So, if we think about the future of food systems, where do you see the hardest trade offs emerging? Is it going to be efficiency, equity, speed and inclusion, innovation, resilience? Where do you see the trade offs, the hardest ones kind of emerging in this?
I'll point to what farmers are saying rather than just pontificating myself. I think you do see a lot of interesting pushback where farmers are starting to say, hey, data centers might be competing for the same water. There are farmer protests in a number of countries actually about that particular issues. Obviously Digital Green, we're really kind of excited about the promise of AI, but we also see the ways that you could make AI a lot more environmentally efficient. So I'm hoping that that trade-off can actually be managed better than it looks like maybe from right now. I think water is going to be the big natural resource constraint we're going to be seeing, not just because of AI. It's always been the constraint. And because we know that there's also going to be better farming land and less better farming land, people are going to be moving around a lot. So I guess what I worry about, I think a lot about how do we help farmers prepare sooner for the big shifts that are coming so that they could make the choices they want to make. Right. So the thing that's cool about sort of this work we're doing today that I mentioned about directly putting something in a farmer's hand where they can ask any question they want and get relatively good advice is if as a farmer, you can tell me that if the trend continues in 3 years, my rice yields will be half of what they are now because climate keeps continuing. And then you warn me again the next year that it's getting more certain that that's the case. And then you actually give me information about alternatives, other crops I could grow. I can grow millet for, a more drought tolerant crop. And there's a market emerging for that. That's the kind of information I would love for us to sort of give to farmers and help them make better decisions leading into these crises so that it's not such a policy top-down thing, but actually like a farmer agency question. Do I want to get out of farming and migrate to a different area and try to take a different kind of line of work? Do I want to transform the kind of farm I have? Do I want to change the kinds of inputs that I'm using to tackle a different market opportunity? So I guess what I would love to see is if the trade-offs could be made more individually by kind of making options much more available to farmers. That includes at the policy level. Like one of the biggest topic areas we see people asking about in farmer chat is related to entitlements. People want to know, am I able to access this program or that program? And not just in farming. They want to know kind of what can I get access to within my government's kind of service provision. So I guess water is what I'd say in terms of resources. I think that's what we have to think about. Soil fertility, we need to build it up, but there's a water issue in several parts of the world where you have very large populations that are in farming and the water tables are very low. I would say that's what I'm most concerned about. And so then how do you farm in a way that preserves that? And then how do you set farmers up to make better choices earlier so that we're not at crisis points when those trade-offs are happening?
What's one thing that you wish people that don't work in this space knew about the potential of technology and agriculture coming together?
I wish people could come with me on a field visit and go to a farm and see the sort of excitement of a farmer or many farmers all running in completely different directions to chase what looks like the most prosperous, exciting farm that they could have. What I mean by that is I've been with farmers 3 different times in the last 6 months in Ethiopia and Kenya in 2 different times, and, there has just been a vacuum of information available to small scale farmers. You know, they are tremendous sharers of information across their farms. They will share any information they have with neighbors. Extension agents work incredibly hard, but they have, 1,000 farmers they have to serve at a time. So how do you ever get to all of those farmers? Which means you're kinda left to your best guess if you have a new pest or if you're trying to figure out what to do to manage, a drought. And so when you see a farmer hold something in their phone where they've been able to ask all of their questions and get the immediate response they want, not only that, but then in some cases, farmers will tell you about like, I asked questions, I got the answers, I did all my homework, and then I went and negotiated with my agri dealer. And I actually got the exact thing I wanted. And they tried to sell me more, and I told them I didn't need that much. And I went home and applied it. And then it worked, right? This like I did the thing, I solved the problem, I got the information in the moment I needed it, and my crop bounced back. I wish people could see that that is happening a million times a day now. Like, people are starting to, like it's not the problems weren't getting solved before, it's that you couldn't often get the information in the moment it mattered the most. Where if you had gotten the information, your cow wouldn't have died. Now you can get the information. And I think there was a study that came out, like, maybe a year or 2 ago that was looking at India specifically, but it was looking at smallholder farms, and it was asking a question like, are small scale farms inherently less efficient and productive than medium or large farms? Or can you have the same degree of efficiency on a small farm that you can on a larger medium? And the study basically said you can have the same efficiency on a small scale farm. The difference is that you often can't get the knowledge and you can't manage the labor the way that a machine could on a large farm. And so when I think about like this moment of incredibly hardworking, incredibly smart people who have a lot of indigenous knowledge, but just couldn't always get what they needed in the minute they needed it, having that unlock, all I can think about is we're going to have an incredibly diverse system. We're going to have a huge hustle culture with like young people coming off of farms, looking around and creating new kinds of food businesses. And there's going to be displacement from AI in a whole bunch of other ways. But I kind of think that maybe the best news story that's going to come out of it, if the AI sector is thinking we don't have much to offer ag, I think we're going to see it actually does, and that the farmers are going to drive some pretty impressive changes. So I wish people could see and experience the excitement that farmers have when they get what they need.
If you had to place one big bet on the single shift could most contribute to accelerating progress towards ending hunger, what would it be?
I am going to be really biased about this one. So basically, the vast majority of the world's small scale farmers, 500 million or so, don't have access to high quality advisory. And there's different studies. You can look up how much. I've seen many studies that say across different geographies that the range of people who do have access to extension services is between like 20 and on the optimistic side, 50%. So you have somewhere between 50 and 80% of the world's producers not sure where to go to get high quality advice about how to farm better. I honestly think that we're going to be able to solve that problem in the next 5 years, in the next 10 years. Imagine the productivity and the better, more nutritious food that could come from that if farmers simply just had the information they needed at the moment they needed it. I think that's going to be a humongous driver of increases in yields and productivity. But as you and I have talked about many times before, like just having yield and productivity in your major staples is not enough. We need a really diverse food system, but being able to grow lemongrass or ginger or some, lychee, that is a different degree of agricultural information that's not going to be available from your typical extension agent anyway. But technology can help us do that. So I think the single biggest thing is I think we're going to pretty much close the knowledge gap. And not only that, farmers are going to start teaching AI things that the science community doesn't even know yet because farmers are natural innovators. So I'd put my bet on that. And then I would say we're still going to have a problem, which is that in past moments in history where there's all of a sudden been a big increase in productivity, then the markets get flooded, the prices crash, and then the farmers go, oh my gosh, I didn't make money even though I made more food. Producing enough is great. How do you produce the right amount of the right stuff and get it to the people who need it? That'll be the next challenge. But I'm pretty bullish on like leave it in the hands of the farmers, give them the information they want and watch what they do. I think they're going to feed us all, and it's going to be a lot more diverse than we've been able to manage in previous kind of moments in history.
One thing I like to close things off with is a bit of a recurring question. What's a food memory that shaped who you are today?
Well, I'm sitting at my kitchen table right now, and I can only think of like sitting at my grandparents' table. I'm from Iowa, and I have a lot of memories of my grandpa being out in the field and then coming in and my grandmother putting lots of little bowls of food on the table. I don't know, Iowans have this thing where they like to put like a bowl of pickles and a bowl of cottage cheese and a stack of bread and a bunch of things plus some sort of main dish. And there was always sort of this like moment of rest and replenishment, I guess, coming in from the heat and sitting down at a table. And that kind of like abundance and rest is probably the memory that shapes me most. I think everybody deserves to have a table like that, farmers included.
Absolutely. Well, thank you so much, Alesha. It's a really important work and super interested in seeing how it rolls out and continues to grow.
Yeah, I think we're all watching and waiting as well. I mean, I think just to close out for anybody who's interested, download Farmer Chat. It's on Google Play Store, and I think we've already had about 1.5 million farmers do that, and more each day. So check it out, and yeah, thanks for having me.
You've been listening to Future Fork, a show that explores the world of food and the decisions we can make today that will shape our future. Future Fork is produced by Disruptive Consulting Solutions and supports the SDG2 Advocacy Hub. For more info, head to the website futureforkpodcast.com. This show was produced with strategy and production support from Wavelength Creative. So you don't miss an episode of Future Fork, make sure to subscribe to or follow the show in your podcast app. And while you're there, leave us a 5-star review. It really helps others find the show. I'm Paul Newnham, and I'll see you in the next episode.